going to talk about some of the sort of specifics behind making the work, its kind of creation, before I talk about the kind of theories, or as the slide just said, before turning the face back over and having a look at the back of it. But yeah, I think it'd be interesting to just have a look a bit closer at how the work's in dialogue with itself and with the world, as was mentioned earlier today. Important to remember, I think, that the work is also part of the world that it's in dialogue with. With that in mind, crack on to the non-theory. I mean, hopefully, as I talk about the non-theory, the theory all kind of comes out, and it's all connected. Hopefully it'll make it a bit less abstract. So this is where the work was made, not in a traditional studio at all, but a very brief residency I did in a fairly heinous sort of place that I chose to work in, which is one of those Sunday afternoon places that you go to with your kids, you know, a real mixture of kind of antique shop and tea shop. I mean, the reason I wanted to work there is a lot of my work is concerned with how we use, how we exploit and enjoy heritage and nature. So this is a very good site for that. This is where the work was made. Just to complete disillusion any idea of glamour you might have behind the beautiful photographs. This is the guinea pig and chicken rearing shed, and I set up in the corner of it. So it was completely obviously made involving a non-art audience. Basically, the original idea I had for the residency was to photograph the animals in a stage set. I'm very interested in taxidermy, and I mean, I'll say a bit more about that later, but about the whole sort of project of trying to freeze life for some kind of archival reason, kind of fighting on mortality with this attempt to kill stuff and keep it. So that's what I was very interested in, was photographing live animals as though they were stuffed. But it soon became apparent that that wasn't the most interesting thing here. And so I was using the masks instead. I had a little shop on sale here and with things on sale, which again is very important because most of the things I use are commercially available. Again, talking about the commercial use of heritage of nature. So I photographed the visitors. Yeah, it was slightly risky because I didn't know who was going to come, if anybody. And then once people did come to look around the place, obviously they were coming to look at the rabbits and things. They weren't interested particularly in what I was doing. So then I had to kind of assault all sorts of parents and kids and try and get them involved. Which I'm usually extremely keen to do, which kind of surprised me. So yeah, I've got lots of models on board. The kids chose their own masks, and I didn't pose them in any way, apart from obviously insisting they sat in this setup. Now, I painted the backdrop and borrowed the plants. Some of them are artificial plants which I brought with me, but there's a garden centre on site there as well, so it's quite convenient. I was able to go this way. But yeah, so the kids just sat naturally, if you can call it that. It was mentioned again yesterday about how even at age 3, kids have this self-conscious way of sitting. And it's quite interesting what the masks did to that in terms of gesture and body language. Not least just because on a practical level, looking through these masks is really difficult. So most of the children ended up looking through the nose holes instead of the eye holes. So there's an awful lot of quite pompous looking gestures where they've got their chins in the air. Because they're trying to look at me, just a woman taking photos. So that's what the camera saw, effectively. That's a slide taken from the tripod in that setup. So I'm very interested in that sort of apparently magical thing that happens really when you look through a lens and when you take a photograph. The scene really was grotty, as I've just shown you, but there's no hint of that in the work. And it's an interesting question whether that is really important to the work. I've troubled over it for a while, and in fact, some current work I'm doing at the moment, I'm probably going to include the sets that I'm photographing people in alongside the work. It's a difficult thing to do. I think there are real pros and cons to both. But here, I think it was the first time I've worked site specifically with the intention of making work that would be shown in a gallery space. And I think ethically and on a lot of different levels, that's quite a difficult thing to do. I work quite a lot site specifically. It's very important to me to sort of engage as a tourist, not in any naively sort of genuine level, with a place or with a time, and to make work that relates to that. And so knowingly making work that's then going to appear very much outside that space, in a very different context, is quite interesting. And I was interested in what Bristol said this morning about Jeremy Della, about how, I'm not misquoting, but saying that being in the white cube perhaps limited that work. That's the skirmish work that he mentioned. Oh, sorry, the work that was shown in the skirmish magazine as well. What I troubled with this work and with a lot of the work I do is actually accepting the fact that the white cube is always the opposite of limiting, actually. It's an incredibly liberating place to work. When you make work on site and for the specific site audience, which I have done a lot within museums and other heritage places, it's very difficult to get a broader interpretation. I think museums are such eclectic places that it's surprising. They're very happy to take on all manner of things that don't really fit in a very logical way, and that includes my work. And so getting some sort of critical engagement, it's actually really refreshing to come out into a white cube and to get it discussed. I mean, if I had shown this work within that site, for example, I wouldn't be here now and we wouldn't all be discussing this work. I think the white cube is incredibly useful for that, and I think Jeremy Della's practice is a very good example of how to use more non-site work, non-gallery work practices, but using the framework and context and the real value that you can get from then and moving into the gallery. So here we are in the gallery. So yeah, just talk a little bit about its formal policies, not a lot, but it is important. I mean, the form and the concept is always entwined in my work and most people's work. So to go back again to something that was said yesterday about whether repetition itself can be a concept, it's a very interesting question that I would say, yeah, it's a very important part of my concept, definitely, because what I do quite often is reference collections and look at what happens when you index things and you put work together so that you start ordering and you encourage an ordering that's about similarities and difference and comparing, and that's what you get within a series, and that's what you get within a museum or within any collection. It's the importance of similarity and difference. And on a slightly less sectoral level, I really like seeing them as a gang. I like how they interrelate, how they sort of dominate a room as their own little clique that you can't quite be part of. And individually, they are slightly too iconic, really, for me. They reference a little bit too much the kind of history of portraiture that's kind of behind them. I really like that to be in there, but not as the dominant kind of meaning. The title, of course, Noah's Ark, stating the obvious. Noah's Ark has been described as the archetypal collection by Susan Stewart. And of course, it's also got that human-animal relationship that's very important in my work. The control, more importantly, human control over environments. And of course, Noah's Ark was about collecting as preservation rather than what I started describing in terms of killing things off in order to keep them. He was actually dealing in live things and it being an act of creation to collect. And that was quite interesting. And the murmurs part, obviously, is just that the works have their own voice. obviously I'm speaking a lot louder than they are at the moment. That's a very unusual situation. Normally the works talk a lot more than I do. But it's a murmur. It's not, they don't shout very confidently, they don't have a single message. Again, like what was mentioned earlier, I'm not at all ashamed of the ambiguity, and quite the opposite. I think ambiguity, which is not the same as a kind of banal pluralism at all. It's not saying anything goes, but a lot of things do go. And it was kind of mentioned just earlier about how meaning gets forged and intentionality. That's incredibly important in everything that we do, not just as artists. The scale as well, just very quickly, they're about 1 metre by 1 metre, which is important because the children's faces, or the masks, are just larger than the viewers. So they're not so gigantic that they're very intimidating. They do invite some kind of relationship, but they're very unsettling. Because, I usually hang them quite, well, a little bit higher than normal as well. They're a little bit low in the Turner house, but that's just my personal preference, is that I like them to kind of loom slightly. And I like them to be spotlit as much as possible within a sort of darkness. That's just, again, it's slightly theatrical, which I think it's important to have, just to make the theatre of looking at artwork quite apparent, because the whole artifice of the situation, looking at work, receiving it, quite apparent. And being square, of course, reminds us they're made from 120mm negs, so there's a direct relationship to their personal history as objects, and a kind of nod at their authenticity. You know, these things really did happen in front of the camera. Yeah, as Sophie Cowan says, or said, everything I tell you may not be true, but it all happened. That's something that I'd really like my work to do, is be a document of something that did happen in front of the camera, but in such a contrived way that you can't help but wonder whether it's, to what extent it was orchestrated and to what extent accident was allowed in. Right, I also made just one last one. I'm forgetting that one thing. I also made a panoramic version. Which is a 3 metre wide version, slightly different film stock. This was originally 35mm and scanned and manipulated. This is very different, and as I just said, you know, being slightly authentic goes out the window with this one. It's very obviously manipulated. The stitching together isn't absolutely perfect. It doesn't take you very long to work out where the drawings are. Again, that's absolutely deliberate. And it goes back to that gang thing. They're much more like a gang when they're laid out like this. You kind of start building up artificial narratives between them, how they relate to each other. The fact that it's panoramic is very important as well. I think there's something about widescreen. Nicolas sort of mentioned the thing of distance. The thing that you're not, it's a view on something, you're not looking at something. And it shifts your relationship quite significantly with them. And like this, because of the relationships between them and between the live animals that are within these as well, it is a bit more, it references theatre much more strongly than the others do. I think there's much more an element of fantasy. It's a bit more like a frieze you might see at school, I suppose. So there's much fewer links with the sort of history of photography that's involved in the pieces. So, as I've moved a bit more into theatre, I'll make it a bit more explicit now why all this links with fictions Abound, and hopefully that's fairly, it's become fairly obvious in your minds already that you're already starting to work out your own relationships with this work. Yeah, what's behind all the work I do is a real interest in the impossibility, really, of getting objective records of place, time, and experience. But more than just the actual how impossible it is, the fact that we still do it. You know, I love the fact that we have this complete engagement right back to Victorian, pre-Victorian times, that the world is there to explore and to exploit, as was mentioned earlier. And that even though we know, we're not that naive, and I don't think our Victorian forefathers were either that naive. We know we can't do it. We know the snapshot is never going to encapsulate what that moment felt like, but there's something in us that really wants to capture it. So that's at the back of everything I do, and that's why I work with museums such a lot. I think museums are a great example of that practice. So how we order and organise and make sense of our past, and through that our current situation and our possible futures are absolutely at the heart of this. I came to working with museums and this sort of work through questioning what it is that artists do, why we practice at all. I'm from a fine art background. So all those kind of burdens of self-doubt are my materials. So when I was looking at why we do what we do, it seemed to make sense to look back at those historical examples and kind of link that an awful lot of contemporary practice is like an old museum practice. It is some form of trying to make concrete the ephemeral and trying to give longevity to our very short lives, I think. I often use tamed elements in the work. So sometimes represented by nature or animals or children or all three. So these are things that are sort of romantically seen as kind of uncultured or uncontrolled things, which also kind of question. So these are a couple of other examples. I won't talk about it very fully, but this is a residency that I did a couple of years ago in Norwich. So that photography is just one mode of practice that I use, but all of my modes of materials reference collecting. So photography, video, installation, and intervention. All the way I use them anyway, very much bound up in the same practice of trying to collect and collate and keep order. That quite often I mentioned that in relation to place of time, site specific, as this work was. This was a summer house to explore and see how I'd been exploring the site. Or somebody, it wasn't actually named to me, it was a kind of invisible explorer. It's important that while I'm doing this practice, I'm also sort of subverting it, so that they're always combined with artifice and theatre, and references to realist painting as well, quite often, in museum collections. This is another photographic work. So the fiction's Abound thing, and where I fit in. It's just that I won't use the camera to document the moment in a sort of old school sense, I guess. It's very important to me to sort of disrupt the camera's history of objectivity, so that while I'm revealing, I'm also obscuring. That's really important. So that while I'm documenting, I'm also creating. So I'm documenting things that wouldn't exist without the document. I'm not, in answer to what was mentioned this morning of the world being a picture to be taken, I don't agree with that at all, actually. The world is a creation of our pictures, maybe. I'm not sure I need to think that out more carefully, but certainly I think our act of photographing the world is a creative act, and one that makes the world how we see it, really. So because of this, I have a very embellished approach to recording, obviously in presentation, so that all of those politics are somehow suggested in it, hopefully. And the fact that they're physical photographic objects is very important. I don't usually framework at all. It's the first time my work's ever been framed, which is quite interesting for me to see. Because it's very important to me that you know it's a photograph. There's so much there's a trickery going on in there, the material itself kind of shouldn't be a trick, or at least it should be a big part of the trick that you enjoy the fact that it's a straight photograph. Yeah, and this is to question the relationships we have to the world, obviously both present and past, and to indulge in the suspension of disbelief that we all have. I think it's really quite a playful thing that we love knowing we're being tricked. You know, we know this is part of maths, but we enjoy the play that happens as we look at it. And that's in all of my works. So yeah, I've often used interpreted items alongside everyday items so that orchestration and accident happen together, and combine the motivations of creativity and documentary. And when I was first thinking about that, I was thinking that they were opposites, but of course they're not, and that's a very important thing for my work and for a lot of this conference actually, is that creativity and documentary aren't opposites at all. They happen one in the same. So just very briefly to mention some of the non-postgraphic work that I do that really references photography quite strongly. This is called the Museum of Institutional Labour, and it's a wood workshop that I lit with spotlights and arranged a couple of things, not a lot. I mean, obviously here you can't really make out what they are, but they're kind of old-fashioned little red shoes. They don't normally have those in the workshop, particularly, so things like a little mouse that I brought in as well, which actually got stolen. But yeah, looking at it's a connected interest, codes that suggest to the audience what it is you should be feeling. And I think it's difficult showing this work in photographic form because it was very important that the audience was looking at this real space in a filmic and photographic way because of being lit, and yet at the same time the spotlights were all very, very obvious, very deliberately so. So there wasn't, it was a very basic trickery. You knew you were looking at something that was spotlit, not a film set, just an ordinary wood workshop. But it took on this really magical quality. And that's important in that I chose it to be a wood workshop because of so many museums that I work in use industrial spaces because of this. Well, I think they're almost romanticising labour is almost a defining behaviour really of the leisure class. It's something quite peculiar to the leisure class. So having this nostalgic view of the museum creating life, and it's also very important that the sort of spaces that I reference are very anonymous. You know, this isn't Churchill's desk or that wonderful shed that Dylan Thomas has written all those plays in. This is an anonymous space that anonymous people worked in. That's much more interesting to me because those are the histories that we can adopt much more easily. They're presented to us as a foundation to all of our social and cultural histories. They're not just a frozen moment of a famous person's life. They're moments that are significant still to all of our lives. Is that about my time? That feels like a good moment to stop. All right.
He's currently visiting fellow at the University of Newport, also editor of Photovision and professor in the audiovisual communication program at the University of Pompeu Fabra Barcelona, and a very prolific artist and publisher, writer. Really could have shown any number of his projects, I think, of his work in the Fictions Abound exhibition. We haven't shown here in chapter the Google Grams, which is one of his more recent works. It was first shown at Paris Photo and came straight from Paris to Cardiff. So I welcome John Packerberg.
concerns that have been expressed by previous speakers regarding the fact that it's not intellectually useful to consider photography within the strict field of art world, and instead it's much more interesting and thrilling and challenging to place it as any other kind of human communication. My work is inspired by this prosaic, chameleonic nature of photography. All sorts of photographic culture interest me. And I think that I take advantage of that interest, doing a work which responds critically to some hegemonic tendencies. We now discuss the tension between documentary and fiction. And I believe, because of the previous statement, that this should be regarded in a more extended framework, that of the conflict between truth and falsehood in visual messages. And in fact, if we now talk also about the crisis of the documentary tendencies or languages in photography, is also probably an effect of a broader problem, which is the rise of skepticism in which we live. I feel that we should reconsider the voices which articulate our ways to approach reality. And modestly, my work is an attempt to do so. My work is not anti-documentarist, it's meta-documentarist, it's about documentary. I need documentary photographers to deal with, to talk about the work, to reflect critically about the work. So I think that this dialogue is fruitful, and I expect that the presentation that I prepared for you will prove it. In fact, it will be a very visual presentation. I don't know if you realize that I'm losing my voice, and I'll try to speak as little as possible in order to arrive to the end. I will provide some reference that coming from a foreigner probably are more. Let's go back, just a few months back. Let's go to December. In Bolivia, there were elections, and for the first time in the history of that conflictive country, a candidate coming from the indigenous population was elected. For the first time, the president is not going to be someone coming from the oligarchy, someone coming from the military people, someone from the people, from what some respectively they call the Indians. So an Indian will be the president. Someone who has been the pretext for the jokes because he's not wearing a jacket and a tie in official events, but instead he's being famous for his multicolored pullover. Well, when Evo Morales won the presidency, he announced that the first country he wanted to visit was Spain. Of course, the fact that this candidate was gathering so special features made him the target for many jokes, political jokes. Some were intelligent, but most of them were very silly, even sometimes racist. In Spain, we have a radio station owned by the Catholic Church, and they had a very bizarre occurrence. They hired a popular humorist who is famous for imitating voices, especially the voice of the Spanish Prime Minister. And they asked that humorist to call Evo Morales and act as being President Zapatero. The poor Morales who for the moment seems to be a little naive, bought the story. And for half an hour, talk live on broadcasting radio with an humorist thinking that he was talking to the president of another state. Of course, this was a scandal and originated diplomatic conflict. Morales was going to be received by the actual real president of Spain and the king of Spain, and that episode was not the fast welcoming stage. So there were a lot of controversies in the media, in the political circles. I mean, why creating that fiction? Why joking with that? And in fact, this is just an anecdote to explain what's coming next, which is that around Christmas, exactly December 23rd, it's usual that the royal family delivers some official photographs to the media to congratulate the Christmas, a sort of Christmas cards. And on the next day, on December 24th, all the newspapers published that picture, an official portrait of the royal Spanish family. Well, nothing special, they do that every year. But along the day, people paying attention to that picture realized that something was wrong. And specialists were analyzing the image and then realized that it was a wood montage. The king has no legs. By the queen is too big. I mean, there's a perspective problem. The characters are not shadowing the background. I mean, there are a lot of technical problems, easy to identify for those able to handle the Photoshop. So it was a very bad photo montage, but even the man who did that didn't realize that the original pictures which were used for that cut and paste image were altogether in the official royal family webpage. So you could find as a puzzle exactly which piece was coming from every single element of the composition. Of course, the photomontage has a clear symbolical meaning. I mean, for the first time, the king and the queen were not together with their sons and daughter, but with the grandchildren. So the idea, I assume, was to ensure the continuity of the institution. The message was clear. But the question is, why not doing a straight photograph? I mean, why doing this sort of montage? It's not usual. So of course, immediately there was a reaction from journalists and political observers because they were disappointed. I mean, the Spanish people were disappointed. Myself, I was at first disappointed. I would have liked to have done the job. And probably it would have been more difficult for observers to realize it was just a hoax. But besides my own disappointed attitude, there was more interesting and theoretical consideration to be done. The first one is that in this composition we should consider two different levels of veracity. I mean, one is what we could call the optical veracity, perception veracity. I mean, this picture is not truth, but symbolically, it's truth. I mean, these grandchildren exist. They could have been together. They weren't together. The pretext, official pretext, was very funny. They said the kids were having a very hectic agenda and they didn't find, a moment to be all together. So, that's that first consideration. Okay, it's a hoax, it's a montage, it's not a straight shot, but it could be. And the meaning of the picture is the same. The second theoretical consideration is that when people complain, the spokesperson for the royal house just said, listen carefully, we never said it was a real picture. So, it's your fault. You were not critical enough to realize that it was not a real picture. So, it's returning the responsibility to decide what's truth and fiction to the audience. This means that now, every time that we get another picture to read, by the royal house, by the government, by the media, we should look carefully if they don't ensure that it's a real picture explicitly. Well, this is something that I have encountered many times in my life as a photographer, curious and collector of similar situations. Sometime before, I was traveling from Switzerland, and in Lugano, in the Ticino area, I found this picture. It's a postcard of the Rivera, the lake, landscape, nothing special. But not far away from the booth where I bought the postcard, I found this other one, which is very similar in terms of composition. I mean, the perspective is almost the same. But suddenly, there's a new feature in that. And 20 yards from one postcard store to the next one, a big photogenic, photographic movement took place, and suddenly the Montecerino, one of these impressive mountains in the Alps, had emerged. Well, these were printed, published postcards. So, what was the reason for a publisher to do that tours? Very simple. This postcard is twice more commercial. Why? Because it's gathering two different touristical attractions in one single shot. I mean, you can buy this postcard and explain to your relatives and friends that you've been sailing on the lake and walking on the promenade and then skiing on the lake. So, I understand that in that case, the conflict between perceptual truth and touristical truth was not a reason enough for the publisher and for the customers to go ahead with making that this postcard is set up. These are present contemporary cases that we can go back in history. I mean, we can go as back as at the origin, the very origin of photography. You probably know this couple of daguerreotypes taken by Daguerre himself from the window of his studio in the Boulevard du Temple. These are daguerreotypes which Daguerre sent to King Ludwig in Bavaria, and that Raymond Newhall, when he was preparing the exhibition for the MoMA in 1938, reproduced. It seems that the original daguerreotypes got lost during the Second World War. But the interesting thing in that daguerreotype is that there's a second one taken probably a few hours later, and which the second one displays, of course, different shadows, different structure of masses, but basically is the same view, probably because the camera didn't move from the tripod. But the important thing is that in this second shot, there's a Shushina at left. So, why Daguerre took a second shot? I speculate, probably because he wanted to reflect the effervescence of urban life. was not able to be recorded. So finally, what's I think that the reason of that picture is not clearly appearing. Just the opposite. Daguerre depicted a ghost city. Instead, in this second shot, at least we have some human scale. We have a human reference. And maybe it's having some human dimension. I wrote a short paragraph on that picture. The daguerreotype would capture architectures and monuments that would fail to capture the dynamism of urban life, that which constitutes its essence. Daguerre understood for the first time the dilemma that pitted historical veracity against deceptive veracity. This episode adds a valuable contribution to the ontology of photography. The strictly documentary use of the camera fails in its attempt to capture reality live. It's only by tricking, it's only by setting there a model, probably Daguerre's assistant. It's only by tricking that we can achieve a certain truth. Only with a conscious simulation that we approach an epistemological satisfying representation. Let's go further. In 1997, I was in London, and for the first time in my life, I discovered electronic photo. At that time in Spain, we had still the old-fashioned analogic chemical photo, where you get there, sit down, press the button, and you get your passport or your identity photo done in a couple of minutes after it's processed and dry. But now the electronic photo booths are much better because they not only provide your portrait, but in their memory they keep images of famous people. For instance, at that time it was Jagger, someone from Manchester United, the Spice Girls, and Prince Charles, and so on. And you can set the photograph, your portrait, together with those other images in the memory. Of course, again, the market and consume are impelling this sort of possibilities. But again, my reflection was historical or former photo booth were the paradigm of reproduction, were like doing a photocopy of your physiognomical identity. It was just a frontal view, flash. Instead, now, this new photo booth is pushing you to do a photomontage. I mean, it's completely the opposite. And I believe that when the general public gets aware of this difference, it is affecting enormously to our general credibility towards photography. And I believe that this is very good because it's transferring credibility from the medium, from the technology, to the author, to the human, to his intelligence. Again, these sort of fictions have a lot of samples going back in history. We've seen the first intervention in a photograph done by Daguerre in 1838. Now this is the first stage photograph by Bayard, 1840, when, as you know, he photographed himself as a ground man and wrote on the back of the picture that he committed suicide because the French state didn't recognize his contribution to the discovery, to the invention of photography. The daguerreotype that we wanted to provide a description. This picture is already narrative. It's providing a sort of discourse. It's explaining. And because of that, probably, it's including a deeper sense of fictional content. Let me now show you some elements which also refer to a situation experienced in Barcelona where I lived recently. there's a music festival called Sonar in springtime, which is devoted to electronic music and new media art, organized by a very dynamic group of people and sponsored by the City Council. Every year, the institutional visual campaign is done with a lot of creativity. And last year, they provided, in their own words, a tribute to great rip-off artists in history, an homage to an attitude, clever and shameless, that ends up evoking society sympathy and ultimately turns these characters into popular heroes. Who are they? Well, people famous for their frauds, people famous for their fakeries. For instance, this is Victor Lustig. In May 1925, he sold the Eiffel Tower to a French industrialist pretending to be deputy director of the Ministère des Postes et Télégraphes. The embarrassed victim never reported the scam, and Lustig later repeated the thing. This is Maestro Dorban. During the 70s, he was the most popular magician on Peruvian TV. In the early 80s, he performed his greatest feat, a tour de force. On live television, he made a briefcase disappear with $2 million inside. He disappeared as well. Jesse Gomez, 72 hours after winning the 84th Boston Marathon, the organization realized she had covered part of the distance by cycling. Elmer de Ori, art forger. His Modiglianis were valued higher than the originals. His work can be seen in museums around the world. Arthur Ferguson, in 1925, he sold the White House to a Texas millionaire. It was to be paid for in installments of $100,000 per year. Previously, he had hired out Big Ben, Buckingham Palace, and later the Statue of Liberty. Anne Mayer, in 1960, her photographs of a supposed UFO sighting in Machu Picchu were seen all over the world, earning her a wide reputation among international ufological circles. 15 years passed before it was discovered that the photographs had been taken in the garden of her Miami house with some very convincing models. El Dioni. In 1989, he managed to escape with 298 million pesetas, driving an armored van he was supposed to look after while working for a security company. The exploit man, he was a popular hero in Spain. And the last one, Rogelio Fernandez. For more than 2 decades, his meticulous forgery of an Aztec mummy was the major tourist attraction in the municipality of Guamara, Mexico. Today, his granddaughter still charges 10 pesos per ticket to view his preserved corpse. Well, the funny thing is that since this was something paid by the city council, by the municipality, the opposition group in the city council immediately blamed that doing advertising about those people was not a good model for our youth. And during several weeks there was a controversy in the press. And just at the end, when the festival was over, the organizers recognized that everything was a hoax, that it was invented, that besides Elmer de Ori, famous art forger, and Dioni, famous thief in Spain, all the rest were just photographs taken from the organizers telling that. So again, it was falsification. Maybe we cannot deal but in fictions which regard other fictions. And maybe we shouldn't avoid a classification or a balance between fiction and reality, and should, as in literary categories, talk about fictional photography and not fiction. Let me show you now some works of an Argentinian photographer I discovered in that summer, Leandro Berra. Leandro Berra was a leftist militant during the dictatorship in Argentina, and one of his best friends was one of the missing, was disappeared, was captured by the police, tortured, and killed. Recently, an archive of all the many of the missing people emerged, and Leandro wanted to do an homage to his dead friend from the clandestine period, and try to recreate his portrait, but he was failing. And then he had an idea which was quite ironical. His friend was killed by the police in Argentina, so he went to the police in France, where he was living in exile in Paris, and requested to use the software that usually the police is using in order to reconstruct cases of missing people or criminals. This method, of course, is based in the 19th century eugenics systems, Francis Galton, Bertillon, who did the first catalog of physiognomical elements and so on. But now we can do that with different softwares. There are used a software called Faces, which is the most sophisticated, and which provides different repertories of all kinds of facial elements, lips, cheeks, eyes, hair, noses, whatever. And with the full combination, you can finally produce about billions and billions and billions, I mean much more than the amount of the human population. So the project consists on asking people to recreate his or her own face without looking at his or her portrait or looking at the mirror. For instance, this is me. This is the reconstruction I try to do of myself. And I challenge you to try to reconstruct your face, because it's really difficult. And probably this sort of project deals about illusion and reality, or being fiction and non-fiction. I'll show you little samples of the project done by volunteer people during the exhibition in art. Sometimes they are closer, sometimes they are not. But the funny thing is that having all this sophisticated, refined device accessible to us, the capture, the way we articulate to approach reality, becomes and difficult here. This is quite close, and I keep for the last sample the finalist. Was she actually believing that she was that face? Well, now I would like to deal a little speedy with a couple of projects which expand the idea of photofiction to the idea of documentary or hoax documentary. This is a category which is getting recognition in academic circles, mainly when it's used to cinema. There have been different festivals of documentaries in cinema, and the term is getting some acceptance. I would define documentary as a complex fictional work. Sometimes it's on progress. I will present a couple of them. The first is one run by a Finnish artist called Alvar Gulliksen, put together a team of photographers, designers, advertising people, and so on, created a non-existing company called Bonk Business. And the project consists on explaining the history of the company. They have a small fishery village village in the Baltic Sea, and they were fishing anchovies. When consumption of anchovy decreased, we start doing anchovy oil for the machinery, which fueled the industry of the country during the century. So the project is not intended to be presented in art spaces, but in commercial trade fairs or all kind of commercial place. The project includes photographs, but also machines, objects, text, all kind of elements which regard to that supposed existing topic. Of course, the work is a ironical criticism of global capitalism, of advertising language, of marketing that we are used to suffer. And it displays the history from the beginning, from the early 20th century up to the late of the century, with different styles, calendars, packaging, products. And the elements that they produce, it's very large, very intelligent. I mean, for instance, it's a corporation specialized in machines which doesn't function. It's, for instance, I read from one of the house organs they print. The secret of our success. Rabakif is a range of fully defunctioned machinery incorporating leading-edge technology manufactured under the most demanding quality standards by highly trained and dedicated staff. Rabakif machines are intended to be a presence on the shop floor, offices, or in any working area. Their true function is its presence, which has now proved to increase job satisfaction, better work motivation, and thus to greater profits. The company is expanding to other business in Paris, like vineyards in France. They sponsored sports. The way the company is organized. The house organs, which they print regularly, or leaflets, commercial, for each different product. And some installation shots. And just an anecdote regarding that work. A couple of years ago, in a gallery in Mexico City, I found the work of Roberto Fabrizi, a Mexican photographer, and I thought that was a similar project. I mean, someone invented a non-existing brand called Furor Jeans and created a false advertising campaign in which the slogan was "Cubre tu carne de furor." In Spain, carne means flesh and meat at the same time. So cover your flesh, your meat of furor. I thought that's a great idea. That's a wonderful piece of art. And I was disappointed because it was real advertising. This showed this sort of movement, swing movement, from art to commercial communication, from commercial communication to art. The second project I want to deal with is Moldania. That's a project by a British team composed by Santo Silalo, Robert Gleisner, and Robert Sitch, which created a non-existing publisher called Travel Guide, which imitates these Lonely Planet cards. And they actually print books of non-existing countries. And they invent everything for the country. They invent the map, the capital, they invent the language, they invent the anthem, and many funny things about anthropology, culture, geography. official singer who is sent every year to the Eurovision Festival and is refused. The singer, and by internet you can have access to the different songs presented every year. The last year's song was titled I'm the Antipo. And it's been so successful that actually Lonely Planet has released another book of a non-existing country. So again, this feedback between commercial advertising and art projects. Well, this is bringing me to personal projects. Of course, there are some which are quite complex and others which are very easy to explain. Sputnik is one of my more sophisticated projects. It tells the story of a lost cosmonaut in space, and because of the dramatic situation, dramatic fact, and because of the propaganda circumstances, the Soviet authorities didn't unveil that miss and that accident and cover up the story with a made-up explanation that his rocket was unmanned, was automatically piloted. So his man was not existing. It's like a science fiction novel, but documented photographically. This is the cosmonaut, and if you look carefully, you realize that it's myself. So this is cosmonaut Ivan Stochnikov. Ivan Stochnikov is my own name translated into Russian. And I'm doing that, providing my face in my name to the main character, because it's the only place where my name is attached to the project. I don't sign it because I'm well known as a falsification artist, so any project including my name will make visitors, will make the public be careful and not experience the project in an innocent So I managed to doctor pictures. For instance, this is Leonov, the first man who did extravehicular activity in the history. Me and the dog. Health message in the interior. But I mean, the important thing of those projects is that they are not intended for art spaces. I mean, that I'm trying actually to present them in industrial fairs or science museums, places where the public is not expecting homes like that. Or I'm trying to publish them, to pass the story as an actual journalistic feature. Sometimes I success, and of course, when this is happening, I'm very happy. Another project like that, but not so well known, is La Isla de los Bascos, the Basque Island. I found that in the St. Lawrence River in Canada, there's a small island which was in 16th century a whaling station for Basque sailors. So just 30 years after Columbus arrived into the Central American coast, the Basques were already in the Newfoundland and Terra Nova areas in the North Atlantic, going for cod fisheries and whaling. And this is not so well known. And a few years ago, when in Spain there was still President Aznar as Prime Minister, who was governing the country, creating a lot of tension with especially the Basque, I thought that doing a project which would recover the history of that particular important episode was a way to talk about the contemporary political struggle in Spain using arguments of 5 centuries ago. Aznar wanted to make Spain return to the imperial splendor of 16th century. Okay, so let's talk about the 16th century, and you will see that Basques were already having problems with the central power at that time. So this is an exhibition which I intended to present in sea museums or maritime museums or historical museums, oceanographic elements, like whales, skeletons, replicas of different vessels, and things like that. But the interesting thing in that project, which is adopting that sort of anthropological and historical documentary processes, these are always used to fuse the whale oil, whale fat to produce oil, and vestiges of past remains in Canada. So the interesting thing in this project is that for the first time in one of my series, everything was accurate. I mean, even I asked an historian from a Canadian university who was checking that all the information I was providing was absolutely authentic and correct. But people, just because it was a project of mine, but if it was just intention, I could introduce a distorting effect in this political debate of past identity or past epic past. Well, it's very complex. There's a book with a lot of text, and I cannot summarize in a few minutes. But it was very funny how the use of my name as a filter the perception of the viewer, and the fact that I was deliberately using a rhetoric language fiction, for instance, the narration of the story started with once upon a time there was an island to which only the bravest sailors could arrive, something like that. I mean that in a deliberate way, I was people distrust of the name. So I was playing, subverting a genre. And I was using models and dioramas from museums to articulate the narration. And only as a concession to my style dealing with fiction, I took a small license to introduce myself as one of the characters in the museum. But besides that, the rest of the information is 100% accurate. These are dioramas I shoot in anthropological museums in Canada, the Museum of Civilizations in Ottawa and so on, or in the Basque Land in Spain and France. And very briefly, I will just show some samples of my current work that I'm doing as a visiting fellow here in Newport. I'm very interested in the fact, I'm very interested in, at the same time, I'm very scared of the fact that the religion is taking such a prominent place in everyday life and in politics. I mean, that both Christian fundamentalism and Islamic fundamentalism seem to have an obsession to go back to crusades and religion wars. And since the September 11 events, I have been considering the possibility that Bin Laden is a fictional character, is a media myth, is a cast produced by DreamWorks or Pixar or one of these companies of Spielberg or George Lucas. He's so close to alien that he cannot exist and he cannot be real. So I'm doing a project which is intended to be published in a newspaper, a magazine, and that I'm not interested in exhibiting those pictures, but instead to introduce me somehow in the transmission system of a news agency and transmit a reportage that, I don't know, one of the speak persons of Bin Laden or Al-Qaeda has been discovered and have been photographed, so I'm working on the elements. All the pictures have been done around the place I live, some organizations in construction, and looks like the Bora Bora mountains in Afghanistan or whatever, but in fact, with the exception of this one, the rest is, for instance, here I'm just reading the subway map in Los ceased. Well, I'm sorry that I wanted to show a lot of things, and I have been doing an overview, very superficial, but in such a way you have a general idea. I'd like to finish with a quotation by Edward Weston, who in the 40s said, "The camera is an honest wheel, only with effort we can make it fly." 50 years later, we should correct it. The camera does not lie, but photographers are liars. So, thank you very much.
We are running a bit over time. We should have had a coffee break 10 minutes ago, but I didn't want to interrupt John and we started a bit late. So maybe we can cut the coffee break a bit short, 15 minutes, or roughly 15 minutes, and be back at 22. If that's possible?